Howdy, welcome back to Wobble Enjoy Sports. If you're new around here, hope I can get you to consider to like the content and subscribe to the channel. But if you are a regular around these here parts, thank you very much for the continuous support. Let's look at the South Sydney Rabbitohs fixture for 2025. The Rabbits begin their pre-season with a game in Gosford against Manly. They then travel down to Mudgee to take on the Dragons. Now, their first 5 games of the regular season, or their first part for 2025, is as follows. Game number 1 is against the Dolphins, Wayne Bennett's old team, Friday night footy, Channel 9, out at Suncorp Stadium. Round number 2, they're down in Wollongong for Saturday afternoon footy. That is a 2 o'clock kickoff for Queenslanders. Round number 3, they are still on the road. They start the season with 3 away games, straight away games. And game number 3 is against Cronulla at Shark Park. And that is, again, a Saturday afternoon affair, 2 o'clock kickoff for Queenslanders. They finally get 2 home games in a row against the Penrith Panthers on Thursday night footy. So a small-ish turnaround for South Sydney there. They play the Sharks on Saturday, then they take on Penrith on the Thursday night at their home surrounds. In week number 5, it's the battle. It's the biggest rivalry in the NRL. They take on the Sydney Roosters for Friday night football. They are just about everywhere. Besides those last 2 home games there in the final part of part 1, they don't have a normal venue that they're playing at. They are at a different venue, including the pre-season challenge, for about 5 or 6 weeks in a row there for South Sydney. And the strength of opposition as well: Penrith, Easts, Cronulla away, Dolphins at home in round number 1. That's not going to be easy at all, even though some people are thinking they may miss the 8. And then the Dragons down at Wollongong. It's early round rugby league and there are upsets abound. Even though South Sydney are looking like they're probably going to return to the top 6 in 2025, that's a tough start for the South Sydney Rabbitohs. Now, part number 2 is technically a home game, but it is on the opposite side of Australia. They are taking on the North Queensland Cowboys at Optus Stadium, Saturday, 5:30 p.m. It's the middle game of Super Saturday. I don't know the time zones just yet, but it's the middle game for Super Saturday. And then they have a pretty short turnaround after that one. So they play on the Saturday. They will depart WA on the Sunday, you would imagine. They then have the Good Friday afternoon game against the Dogs out at Accor Stadium. So they get back on a Sunday and then they possibly have the day off on Monday, or maybe because the week is too short, they just got to get stuck straight into it. And then they will take on the Dogs on Friday afternoon footy, the Good Friday clash that kicks off at 4 p.m. from Accor Stadium. They're on the road again. Now, they're technically the away side against the Dogs, but they're the away side technically again 1 week later. They back it up with a game against the Melbourne Storm. It is the Anzac Day clash that kicks off at 8 o'clock. Round number 9, they're then zipping up to Suncorp Stadium for the second time in the first 9 weeks of the competition, and they're taking on the Newcastle Knights for Magic Round. That's another Wayne Bennett Cup as well. Round number 10, they're then back at home in Sydney. They take on the Brisbane Broncos for Friday night footy. So that strength of opposition there as well. You've got the Cowboys, Dogs, Storm, Newcastle and Broncos. It's about the same, and it's not easy. Part 3 for 2025 is an away game for the South Sydney Rabbitohs. They're playing out at Campbelltown Stadium against the Tigers for Sunday twilight footy. Round number 12, they finally get their first bye of the season, and that is a part of split round. A couple of days after Game 1 of State of Origin that emanates from Brisbane, they are back in Sydney to take on the New Zealand Warriors, and that is a Sunday 2 o'clock game that probably opens up the door a little bit for Origin representation, say Cameron Murray, hopefully Campbell Graham, Latrell Mitchell. Maybe they get to return and play in this Sunday afternoon game against the Warriors, Sunday 2 o'clock at Accor. Round number 14, this will be a fully loaded affair down at Canberra Stadium. Raiders versus South Sydney, Sunday 2 o'clock. And then round 15 to round out the third section for 2025, they take on the Bulldogs. That is Sunday 4 p.m. and that is going to be an Origin affected game. And I think that might, off the top of the dome right now, affect South Sydney more than it does the Blue and Whites. So Section 3, Tigers, Warriors, Raiders and Bulldogs. Only the game against the Bulldogs will be Origin affected. That could be a really, really good part for South Sydney this year. Part number 4 for the South Sydney Rabbitohs starts with their second straight home game, their second of 3 straight home games. And this one is a couple of days after the Perth State of Origin contest. And this is on the Saturday night. It is South Sydney versus Melbourne. I don't think any Origin stars will play in this game, nor should they play in Perth and then fly back over to play for this game on Saturday. It's unfortunate because it is a blockbuster, but I think everyone should err on the side of caution and rest their Origin stars for this one. In round number 17, a fully loaded affair, they take on the Dolphins at Accor Stadium. That is their last leg of a 3 straight home game leg. Round 18, they then travel to Manly. They take on the Seagulls at 4 Pines Park for Sunday afternoon footy. Their second bye for 2025 is in round number 19. So part 4, they take on the Storm and they take on Manly in what will be Origin affected games. They have that contest against the Dolphins, which will be fully loaded. So that is the one that they definitely want to get in that section. But yeah, that'll be a tricky section for Wayne Bennett to bring in his depth and see how he goes with the team list Tuesdays. Last year, they weren't anywhere near the top 8. This year, if they are in the mix to make finals in September, their race to the finals starts in round number 20. How does that look? Let's get into it. Round number 20, they have a game against the Penrith Panthers at CommBank Stadium, and technically they would have been on the road back-to-back weeks, but there's a bye in between there. They're then back at home, but it's out at Gosford. It's a home game for South Sydney. They take on the Sharks out at Gosford for Saturday night footy. Round number 22, I just got a feeling in my bones that this is going to be an absolute ripper. This could be a really special game. Brisbane Broncos up at Suncorp Stadium for Friday night footy, and then they get a pretty decent rest, even though they're still on the road, and it's the second leg of a Queensland trip. They take on the Gold Coast Titans for Sunday 2 o'clock footy. They're then back at home, but it's at Trellians. It's going to be at Allianz Stadium in round number 24 for Saturday night footy. Then it's a short-ish turnaround, but they're still in Sydney. They take on the Dragons at Accor Stadium for Thursday night footy. In the second last round of the season, they have a bye, their third and final bye. And then it'll be really interesting to see how Wayne Bennett goes about round number 27 when the South Sydney Rabbitohs travel to Allianz Stadium to take on the Sydney Roosters. Will someone like a Latrell Mitchell, a Cody Walker, a Jack Whiten, well, they have 2 weeks rest. If they're in a fortunate enough position, say they're sitting 4th, maybe even 3rd with 2 weeks to go, do those 2 players or 3 players, do they just rest out those final 2 weeks of the home and away regular season, or do you just want to get in there and bash the Chooks? It's kind of hard to judge the South Sydney Rabbitohs fixture for 2025 because they were a bottom 4 team last season, but they're well and truly projected, at least in my opinion, to be right back in calculations to be a top 6 team in 2025. So in terms of strength of opposition, it might actually be the hardest one that I've seen so far. They're taking on Penrith, Melbourne, Brisbane, Easts and Sharks twice this season. Now, a couple of those games would be Origin affected, but they're also taking on the Dolphins and the Bulldogs twice this season as well. Pretty much 3/4 of what I've just said, they're going to be right in calculations to make the grand final this season. In terms of also away trips as well, 3 straight away games to start the year for South Sydney. Doesn't matter who it's against. Everyone wants to get that first win at home, and they don't have a home game until round number 4. So they really do need to pick up at least 1 win inside the first 3 weeks of the competition. So I think they're a top 6 team on paper. From where they're coming though, from 2024, you could argue it's tough. Then again, they're going to be a championship quality team this season on paper. So it could be pretty easy for him, but it's not. It's not. That is a really difficult draw. That is a really difficult draw. But I think South Sydney can. I think they can scare him if Wayne Bennett and Latrell and everybody else reconnects and reclicks and rediscovers that 2023 or 2020 to 2023 form. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thank you for your continuous support, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you. Take care. Adios. #RidingHigh 2025.